So Tom, what is your story?
I'm Tom Bell. I was raised right here at the foot of the Wind Rivers. I wasn't born here. I was born in Winton, Wyoming, which was a coal mining camp where my dad worked at the time I was born. This old hotel sort of fits into their life, so it does mine. My dad was one of the very first Yellowstone Park bus drivers that would pick up people right there at the back door and take them to First Brooks Lake and then the next day over to Moran. Well, my mother had gone to work for the Amorettis when they had the EA ranch just above Du Bois. But when they got the Brooks Lake Lodge set up, she was sent up there as a waitress. So she and these other young ladies would meet the bus drivers, and my dad was one of them. But at any rate, my dad was also a coal miner. That is, he'd gone into the coal mines when he was just 14 years old, just got out of the 8th grade. So he never got beyond the 8th grade, but he'd worked all his life. But they met there, and then Dad got a job. The bus driving was just in the summertime. In the wintertime, he worked in the coal mines. And so he got a job at Winton, and that's where I was born. Then when I was 2 years old, or 3, they bought the ranch out on North Fork. So I was raised a ranch kid. I had to think about that. What's my backstory? And I thought, you know, I am an old 87-year-old kid who fell in love with this big, beautiful planet Earth at a young age, and I never got over it. So all of my life's work has been oriented toward just trying to keep what you can of the beauty and the good things of this planet. And that's what's kind of absorbed all of my life. I took time out, of course, to teach for 13 years, and I worked for the Game and Fish for 5 years, but then I just kind of freelance, and that's when I started the Wyoming Outdoor Council and High Country News. All through my life, I've been writing and talking. And so when I was asked by High Country News or somebody who was having a program around High Country News, they call it Headwaters, and it's at Gunnison State College. I was asked to give some remarks there, and I'll just refer to that. When I was in service and we were sent overseas, we went first to Djida, Tunisia, North Africa. Well, Tunis is very close to the old city-state of Carthage. In one of our training trips, we flew right over where Carthage had once been. All that's left of it is a few white pillars of marble laying in the sand. And I knew just enough about it that it kind of amazed me, but it really stuck with me. Within about 2 years, I'd been hit, and I got back to the States and started college, and one of my professors, well, I was in wildlife conservation and game management, and old Dr. John Scott tried to put all of us into perspective as to what had happened down through history. And one of the things that he talked about was Carthage. Here it had been this great, big, beautiful city-state. It was one of these cities of the Mediterranean area where, of course, civilization arose and grew. And Carthage was, it was located in an area at that time which was very productive and very rich. It became the breadbasket for the Roman Empire after Rome took over. Here I'd flown over it, and there was nothing but white pillars lying in the white sand. And I thought, oh boy. Well, Dr. Scott told us why. But I started out talking about that down at Gunnison, at the Gunnison State College, and I said I was citing it as an example of what can happen any place on earth if man loses his humility and his appreciation of this spaceship we call Earth and all its ecosystems. And we are a part and parcel of one of those ecosystems wherever we might live, whether it's in Atlanta, Wyoming, or Gunnison, Colorado, or Tunisia now. And when we threaten the viability of our own ecosystem, we are imperiling our own long-term survival. And that's where we find ourselves today. I think we need to keep in mind and in context that whatever actions we take today in relation to our air, our water, and our land, there are going to be consequences. It doesn't matter if it's drilling for oil and gas in New Mexico or Wyoming or Alaska. It doesn't matter if it's overgrazing in China, Arizona, Colorado, or Montana. It doesn't matter if egregious clear-cutting of timber is taking place in the Amazon jungle, in Indonesia, in Oregon, or British Columbia. We are destroying ecosystems. We human beings are having a serious impact on and taking a tremendous toll of our natural capital, our natural resources, which cannot be sustained. The latest World Watch magazine has an article which says human consumption may already be drawing down resources 20% faster than the earth can renew them. But let me point out that High Country News was founded upon the principles and the philosophy which I have just expounded. I looked down upon Carthage in January 1944. I started High Country News in January 1970, a short 26 years later. And I was 45 years old. At that tender age, idealistic, but not very realistic. All kinds of folks said I couldn't succeed, but I was driven by a passion that we human beings could do better by ourselves and our posterity, and I wanted to write about it, so I created my own forum. And that's how High Country News came in. Then I go on. In all my writing, you will find a common thread running through many of those columns in which I grieve for our planet Earth and what we're doing to it. I grieve for our posterity and the tragedies which would be visited upon them. And finally, I came down to the wonderful saying by Jesus, paraphrased here, "Forgive us, Father, for we know not what we do." And so that's kind of been the thing that's driven me all this time. It still does. You know, I look around out there, I see those young folks walking, and they don't have a clue as to what's happening to them right now, and will happen to them with even greater consequences within the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. It's that close, Shelli. It's very bad. I get stuff from World Watch Institute, and I just stuck this in, and their newsletter said, growth in population and consumption are the twin drivers of environmental unsustainability. We cannot sustain what we've been doing and what we're still doing. And yet you can't convince people, especially like the Republicans in Congress. I mean, they'd like to turn the clock back at least 40 to 50 years to when I first started, when we didn't have any environmental laws. Didn't have any. So we started fighting for them then, for clean air, protect our clean water, protect our lands, watch our forests, and so on. And now they want to throw the EPA out, want to just do away with it. We don't need it, they say. They should have been here 40 years ago, you know. That was at a time when Governor Millward Simpson was governor, and he was watching things, and somebody had been, well, it wasn't more than somebody, it was businesses and lots of folks around Casper were telling him, we need to clean up the Platte River. It's bad. Well, Millward is a very wise, great governor. He went up and looked at the situation, and then he told the oil companies and the corporations, you can't do that. You've got to clean up that river. Within a few years, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio caught fire and caused tremendous damage from the fire spreading to the buildings along the banks. That's what can happen. And that's what did happen. Well, Millward Simpson, in his wisdom, said, you can't do that, you got to clean it up. And now, of course, industry is saying, oh, those regulations, the regulations are killing us. Like hell they are. If you don't have regulations, you will kill us. You know, and that's some of the substance of it. Well, anyway, some other things that I thought I'd point out. I wrote this when I went to work for Roger Budrow. He's the one that taught me all I knew about journalism. And I went to work for him, and he said, you know, Tom, I want you to write a column. He was great on columns, you know. So I said, okay, never done it, but I'm game. I'd been writing these stories for Wyoming Wildlife, you know, kids' stories and that sort of thing. So anyway, I quit at Ocean Lake and went to work for Roger. That was when I started doing this, writing a column. And the first column came out on December 3rd, 1959. And anyway, I go on writing about my background then. I write from the perspective of a native-born, locally grown Wyomingite. My great-grandparents settled at Milford in 1878. For the better part of 70 years, I've lived in Fremont County. This perspective takes in the growing up experience of a ranch boy whose formative years were spent during the Great Depression and the searing drought of the 1930s. It was a terrible time for my folks, as it was for most poor working families. But I go on, my outlook on life is leavened by education, from a one-room country school on Upper North Fork and at Hudson Coal Mine No. 2 to the old Fremont County Vocational High School. Then it was college to 2.5 years in military service, and then back to college at the University of Wyoming. The degrees came as a bachelor's in wildlife conservation and game management and a master's degree in zoology and ecology. I have never lost my love of and respect for science. That's one of the things that just gripes me no end. That those Republicans sitting back there in Congress do not believe in the science of climate change. And it's killing us. It's killing the world. But they are in a position to just stop the works. It's a crime. It's criminal. If there is a hereafter and somebody's looking for justice, those people will just be ground up. It's terrible. I have never lost my love of and respect for science. Scientific evidence obtained and analyzed by trained men and women will always eventually prevail over the darkness of ignorance, paranoia, political correctness, and unfounded rumors and allegations. The truth will always out. And it will, but the problem is, with what's facing us right now with climate change, is happening so fast that we are being bypassed. If the good Lord's hand is on this, he's just saying, well, you dumb critters, if you don't believe me and if you don't want to see what's going on, you'll suffer the consequences. And that's the hell of it all. You know, my grandkids and great-grandkids, they will suffer something terrible, I think. I brought a deal that I took off the internet Well, here it is. Coming to the theater near you, the greatest water crisis in the history of civilization. It'll get so hot and the weather will have changed so much that this story is about the western part of the United States and especially the Southwest. And he points out of the Indian tribes that lived there, that when the white man got there, there was nothing left but a few remains of where they lived. Now, what happened to them? They know what happened to them. It was a terrible drought that killed them all. Well, not all, because they think there's remnants of those people amongst some of the Indian tribes. But they're pointing out that California and Arizona, New Mexico, down through there, they use so much of our water that comes from right up here. I mean, it drains off the other side, and they get it down there, which means that we are going to be affected here now. We've had a couple of good years of nice snow. It's beautiful and white up there now. But how much longer is it going to last? According to the experts and the modeling they're doing, they think that by 2030, 19 years from now, they will be in terrible drought. Look at Texas now. Texas, and I think he cites it here, Texas is in one of the worst droughts they've ever had, not since the great dust storms of the 30s. Oklahoma and Texas are just dry, and that's what they foresee from here on out. Now they're getting a little rain and snow down there now, and they're just delighting in it, but it's going to continue. So that's just one of the things. And South Africa is being caught up in these droughts. We don't really hear about it, and that's one of the other things that is so sad about what's going on. Our big media papers, New York Times, Washington Post, all those others, although the New York Times has been pretty good about putting out information. But for instance, Russia had a series of terrible fires, heat and fires. I've forgotten how many thousand people died just from the heat, but they'd never seen anything like it. And the, I've forgotten what his title is, Medvedev of Russia said they are going to have to do something to try to mitigate it, because they had never in their history seen what happened. It got so hot and so dry that they lost much of their wheat crop. And Russia is one of the big wheat producers in the whole world. So, you know, outside a little bit here, there, so on, our media didn't say a thing about it. That's the other thing about it. People are not alerted to what's going on and what's so bad. So anyway, but that's just one of the consequences, and it'll happen here. And of course, when you lose your water, you lose your food. Just like Russia with that. China, at the same time that this was happening in Russia, China, who produces tremendous amounts of wheat and rice, they were dry and they were hot. And so they lost a lot of their crop. Well, I know that when you ladies go to the grocery, you kind of keep track of what's going on with prices. And when one of these great big deals happens, you may notice that the cornflakes have gone up about 10, 15, 20 cents a box or whatever. It's all figured out with percentages and so on. But all of those things adding up will have an effect on each and every one of us in this earth. Now these rich people, the billionaires and the multimillionaires, they think they can escape it. They can't. They're talking about some of these places in here, the temperature in the summertime getting to be an average of 110 to 130 degrees. You know how you feel when it hits to about 100 to 105 here. Boy, I used to think about the stories coming out of Iraq about the poor soldiers having to work and fight in 110 and 115 degrees and carry those heavy packs and never knowing when a bullet's coming your way. That must have been pure hell. But that's what's going to happen. The rich guys think, oh, well, I can build my house so that it will be impervious to heat. No, you can't. There's no way. Some of the scientists are pointing out that these Republicans in Congress and some of the other people who don't believe in climate change, they say, well, those people will begin to believe when the chemistry and the physics turn right. When it's turned up to 120 degrees, inside and outside your house, no matter what you think you're doing. Now, they think they can probably just pull more electricity off the line. No, because there won't be any electricity. That will have gone. So we're just caught up in a series of circumstances that I think is going to be deadly. And I'm sorry. Well, anyway, I go on. Even as a boy and through my youth, I was a student and keen observer of the natural world around me. It fascinated me and led to my decision to be a trained scientist. As a country boy, I was naive about politics and the subtle ways of the world. It took some 6 years of my life to gain the scientific training I wanted. It took only about the same amount of time to experience the politics and the disillusionment which ended my career as a biologist. And you see, that's the thing now, the politics. This old James Inhofe of Oklahoma. I hope he cooks in his own juices. Don't wish anything bad on him. But he will probably live to see it get to 120, 130 degrees in Oklahoma. Then we'll see what he thinks. It's just too bad.
Tell me about your childhood.
You know, as a kid, I used to ride up on top of Red Butte. It was quite a ways from my dad's ranch, clear out on North Fork, clear to the top of that thing. But my dad had a bunch of horses, and that was all open land. I rode through one fence, an old broken down barbed wire fence that somebody had homesteaded. Dad had these horses, and he'd just kick them out the back gate. In fact, he'd tell me, he'd say, Tom, when you go up and open the back gate and let the horses and the cows out, and they just run out onto the open land, public land. Everybody did it, you know, because it was there. The land was there to use. The cows and the horses were to be there. And so as soon as I got old enough, I started riding a horse. In fact, I rode horseback to school when I was in the 2nd grade, 7 years old. I would ride out there to check them, and that's how I'd get up on top of Red Butte. I'd look all around, and finally I'd look up there and I'd say, oh yeah, I bet they're up there. They were up there in the breezes. Keep the flies off of them. So I got to ride up there. I was always watching for game, but there was, you know, I just see in the paper about the deer numbers are down. When I was a kid, at about that age of 7 and so on, 2 of the bigger teenage kids in the neighborhood had a chance to ride out into that country where I rode later. And they came back, and boy, the word got out. You know, it's just the old one-line telephone. You ring up, and everybody'd hear it, and they'd go listen, and so the word spread in a hurry. Those 2 young guys had seen a deer, a buck deer. It was unheard of in that whole big area. Now you see, this is 1934, 35. That's not so long ago. The biggest thing I ever saw were some of the big jackrabbits, and I mean they were big. And the hills were full of them. And sage grouse. Sage grouse just everywhere. And so I was always looking for different birds and trying to identify them. My granddad, also named Tom Bell, had noted my interest in it, so one time when he was coming to visit, he bought this book, but of eastern birds, but a bird book for me. Boy, I think I still have it. I haven't run across it yet because I'm going through all my book. At any rate, it was again the natural things around me that I saw, and just the fact that I was a part of it, and it was just awesome. To me, it was just awesome, all of these things. I couldn't believe it, you know. The different beautiful things and the different things that were just, I didn't see them every day. They were unusual. I was always looking for that. It's just like the birds. Boy, when the birds started coming through in the spring, I really watched because there's a lot of them I'd never seen before. And it just fascinated me. So, you know, things were pretty much unspoiled.
What was it like living during the Depression?
As just a young boy of my age, I didn't see much of the effects of it, or at least I went to bed at night with my belly full, and my mom would have nice warm covers, and if I had to get outside, we had pretty good coats, but the overshoes were something else. I mean, your feet really got cold. My first year walking that 2 miles from the ranch to the Upper North Fork School, I would just nearly freeze to death. The teachers set me up by the stove till noon, let me thaw out. Oh, it was terrible. My mom wouldn't let me go to school if it was colder than 20 below. My own kids, when I was teaching and they were going to school up here, you know, they'd complain about something. I said, you guys ought to have lived when I did. I had to walk that 2 miles to school. Well, they really embellished it, and they said, yeah, it was uphill all the way there and all the way back. The things that you didn't have that we take for granted now, that would protect you from the cold and all of that, you know. There weren't any fresh vegetables in the wintertime. It was just the things that we take for granted now. You didn't take them for granted then because they just weren't there. And I felt particularly bad for my mother and dad because in our ranch house we had no running water. And in fact, in the wintertime when they turned the ditch off, there was no fresh water of any kind. All had to be hauled in cream cans. The treat of getting to come to town. Boy, I mean, we only came to town 2 or 3 or 4 times a year. It was about 5 miles from town to where my folks lived, out on North Fork. 5 miles by road. And so, and you know, well, gasoline was real cheap, 10 to 15 cents a gallon. And the old Model A's didn't use very much gas, but still it cost money. So we just didn't come to town very often, and besides that, I'd just be awestruck. Just like the first time I walked in New York City, to come into town was really something. And the kids that went to town school, boy, when I was in the 5th grade, my teacher, Agnes Bedeker, taught with me right up here at these schools, but she was my 5th grade teacher. She was about 19 years old at the time. Good looking gal, and Ralph was courting her. Yeah. But she brought me into the spelling bee the year I was in the 5th grade. Boy, and we got to go into the old school that used to be up there that's gone now. Anyway, I was just awestruck. Great big school buildings, because I'd been going to a one-room country school, you know. So, just the fact that things were so much bigger and kind of so much more complex, that was hard for me to kind of figure out. When you came to town also, I think Mom would either just give me a nickel or would buy some kind of penny candy. And that's what us kids got, was a little bit of candy when it came down. There was very little social mingling except for the country dances, and they were held about 2 miles from our ranch house. Milford Grange Hall was a kind of a central place for the community to get together. The vacations and the times when you kind of celebrated Thanksgiving, Christmas, and so on, everybody up and down the creek, they would call on their phones and all decide who was going to take what. But normally it was like a whole full-blown dinner for Thanksgiving, the turkey and everything. But they would all get together, and Stub Farlow, who was by then retired from his bronc busting and so on, but he had a kind of a band, and he played the banjo. And, oh man, I really like that. But his band would come out to the Grange Hall, and then they'd have this dance. And so I'd sit up on the stage right there and watch him play that banjo. Just, I mean, it's out of this world. But the men, they would get to dancing and drinking and fighting. And so they'd go around behind the back of the dance hall and get in these fights. I must have just stumbled into it, going out behind the dance hall and seeing coins there on the ground where these guys have been fighting, you know. So thereafter, whenever there was a big dance, and of course there'd be some big fights, I'd ask my mom, can I go down to the Grange Hall and look for money? So she'd allow me. And I'd walk that 2 miles down and search all around. Man, I tell you, that was really an experience for me, because one time I found, I think, if I remember correctly, it was $6, and 3 of it was the big silver dollars. Oh boy. Oh boy. So I'd pick them all up, and then I'd take them home to Mom and give them to her. Well, she was thankful, because she didn't have all that kind of money, you know. Dad got the paycheck, but she paid all the bills. She knew where the money was going and so on. The only money that she made was during the early 30s, I've forgotten who it was running Brooks Lake Lodge. But because Mom had worked there and they all kind of knew each other yet, they would, it was Foster Scott, great guy. Foster Scott was running it. And he'd send word down to Mom. Well, evidently they'd kind of set it up so Mom would order all these baby chicks. So she'd have like 100, 150 frying chickens. So then when the dudes started coming and the chicks were up good fryer size, he'd send word down, can you send up about 25 chickens? So that was our job for about a couple of days, was to kill chickens and pick them and clean them, and they were all ready to just put in the frying pan. But Mom would do all of that. But from that, I don't know how much she got, maybe $1, $1.50 a piece, but that was her money then to spend. There just wasn't very much money, and of course there wasn't very much that you could buy. It's not like today, when you can go in and buy any kind of Chinese stuff. Any kind, you know? Yeah. People are sure gonna be, they're gonna be saddened, I guess, that they won't be able to go in these stores and buy all this just stuff, junk, that goes to the landfill after about 1 year or less. So then the next year they have to buy more stuff. The American people have just gotten completely spoiled.
So Tom, tell me about your time in the service.
The time I was 18, I was in the service. When I got out of high school in May of 1941, this other young fellow and I, who had worked together in the field, we'd become good friends, and I wanted to go to Alaska. Well, he was a year younger, but his folks said, oh yeah, you can go. So his folks gave him $100, and my folks gave me $100, and we took off and went to Alaska. Gonna set the world on fire. Yeah. He was just 16 and I just turned 17. Well, we spent the summer and I got so homesick. I tell you, if you've never been homesick, you don't know how. It's terrible. I felt like I could have just got out on the water and walked home just to get home, you know. And one of these, I think it's one of these columns that I'm giving to you, I tell about getting home and coming in over Beaver Rim. And when we looked off the rim and saw the big wind rivers and the big expanse of country, I knew I was home. When I got back from Alaska, my folks had sold the ranch, which broke my heart, but I'd just gone off and left them. So anyway, Dad had a bunch of lots in Billings and Bozeman that his mother had bought, my grandmother. And all during the Depression, he had paid the taxes on those. So then had come the time, in 1941, when he could sell them. People were wanting to buy them. So they had moved to Billings. So when I got back to Billings, I just stayed there with him, and I went the first quarter to Billings Polytechnic Institute, now called Rocky Mountain College, I think. But at any rate, I put in my first quarter there. And then come Christmas time, I told my folks I'd sure like to go to Laramie, where all my buddies are, you know, from high school. And Dad said, well, there's nothing keeping us here. Let's just all move. So we did. But on December 7th, I can remember it was a Sunday morning, and we were just all kind of sitting around and eating breakfast, and then this news came, and we said, oh man. When I was in high school, junior and senior year, we had a really great history and civics teacher named Hal Ham. And even then, Hitler invaded Poland in 1939. I was either a sophomore or junior in high school. And all of us young guys then started saying, oh man, we're going to be gun fodder. So December 7th, 1941, we knew for sure. Gee whiz. And the thing about it, at those times it was just radio, because we didn't have TV. But the radio announcers were just very good, and they described in great detail about what was happening. This great huge battleship had just gone down, and the Japanese were just strafing and bombing, and oh boy. So Mom and Dad and I just said, well, it's only a matter of time. I was going to be involved in war.
Tell me about your time at war.
After we moved to Laramie, I turned 18 in April of 1942. And so just as soon as I turned 18, I went down to the draft office and signed up, never knowing how it was going to turn out. I turned 18 in April, and in May there was an Air Corps recruiting team came through, and I told the folks, please let me sign up for Air Corps. So they did. I signed up and I went through the training. I was sitting in a tent over in Italy. I don't know how many missions I'd already gone on. But I got the mail, and here was a notice. I was supposed to report to my draft office in Laramie. They were drafting me. I guess I should have told them. I just assumed that through all of the different things they would know, but they didn't. The guys really joshed me. They said, boy, you better be rushing down to that Laramie office, or they'll put you in a hoosegow. Yeah. I said, well, let them come and do it. So it was a kind of a funny sideline on that. We trained in B-24s. And part of the training, I went from my bombardier school to Boise, Idaho. And
for a bombardier?
Yes, to be a bombardier on a B-24 crew. When I got there, I met the men, all but the navigator. I met the men who I would fly with on this B-24. So we became a team. So we trained there a little bit, and then we got orders to go to Casper, Wyoming. I said, hooray!
Yeah.
By golly.
Almost home. Yeah.
Yeah. I said, oh man, that'd really be nice. I can run home on a weekend.
Yeah.
But at any rate, somewhere in the night, as we traveled through Idaho or western Wyoming, they changed the orders on us. Got up in the morning, we were going to Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Yeah. But that turned out to be kind of neat because I got to visit with my old great uncle.
Oh, that's great.
Who lived there. And so we trained at Scottsbluff and then at Langley. And then when we were at Langley, we were assigned to go, evidently, us guys who were just cogs in the wheel didn't know all of this, but our superiors did. We were to go into the 15th Air Force, which meant flying over Eastern Europe. So we picked up new B-24s, just brand spanking new at Mitchell Field, Long Island.
Wow.
They were turning them out at the rate of about 60 B-24s a day at that time, something like this. You know, when I look back and see what we did in that war, what the American people did, why we can't get together and do things like we did then. The fact that Pearl Harbor caught us flat-footed. I just saw something on TV just the other, there's a man has just come out with a new book. I think I'd kind of like to get it because we asked ourselves, what were we doing that we let the Japanese sneak up on us like that? We were just complacent. Even Roosevelt, they say now that Roosevelt had been tipped off that these things were going on and we had better start watching, but we didn't. So we were just caught flat-footed. I think we had something like 150,000 men in the U.S. Army at the time. 150,000. It was incredible. Most of our big bombers had been destroyed at Pearl Harbor. We did have B-17s, but they hadn't, the B-24 had not been put out on the line yet, but it was coming. At any rate, it's just like when we'd sit in the class up here at Hal Ham's, we'd talk about, you know, what would we do if we did get into war? Because we were not prepared. We're not prepared. And it was the same deal again. The good Republican senators just balked at trying to help Great Britain. Now, Great Britain had been in the war a couple of years by the time Pearl Harbor happened. We were not involved, except that Roosevelt had finally talked the Senate into allowing him to send goods to Britain to help maintain them. But outside of that, we hadn't done anything. And so here's most of our Navy was destroyed and much of our Air Force. And Hitler was just rolling through Europe, and the Japanese were rolling through Asia. It just looked like we were sunk. It was a terrible dilemma, terrible thing. And you know, Roosevelt, he saw what needed to be done, and he got industrialists together and everybody else and said, now we're going to do this. You are not going to make any more cars for as long as this war is on. So there was no new cars made. You're going to make airplanes and tanks. It was just an incredible situation that didn't look, it just didn't look good at all. You know, I was trained to do that, so I kind of enjoyed the dropping of the bombs, but I didn't enjoy all that flak bursting all around us. And of course, that's what blew my eye out was flak. I was on my 32nd mission. We were going to Vienna, Austria. And we were flying from way down in Italy, clear up across to Vienna. So that it took us about 5 hours to fly there, and another 5 to fly back. So they were long missions, and on those long missions we were given credit for 2 missions. If they were short, we only got 1, and I had only been over enemy territory 22 times when I got hit, but I had 32 missions because of these long missions. We were to go to Vienna, and I had been promoted so that I was a lead bombardier, and it was in the works that I was being promoted from 2nd lieutenant at the age of 19 to a 1st lieutenant. And I got that just as I turned 20. Oh boy. But because of what I had done on the mission when we bombed Cassino, Italy, I did something that's kind of, well, to me, I was just doing my job. But these other bombardiers really goofed, and they dropped bombs where they shouldn't have. But I went right in on the target and put my bombs right where I was told they should go, so I got promoted. I was supposed to be leading the day I got hit, but about 10 to 15 minutes out, out from the target, I decided I'd get up and look out through the Astrodome that's up on the top of the pilot and the co-pilot are just right behind me, and the front gun turret is just in front of me, and I'm looking out, and I look ahead to see what it looks like up at the target. But as I stood up and put my head into the Astrodome, which was this dome about so big around and stood about so high, my head would just fit in there so I could see out. So I got up and stood on these boxes of ammunition and looked out, and I was looking off to my right because it was kind of amazing. I was awestruck again. There was red and white flak against a blue sky. And I thought, how ironic, red, white, and blue. And about that time, I felt a hand of something move my head and crash. This big chunk of metal went past my head. I thought it had torn my ear off, so I felt for my ear first, but it was still there. Then I felt for my eye, and I thought, well, I'll never see out of it again. Well, this flak, it came from right up ahead of us and just above us, and it came down right past my head, went over my shoulder, and cut all of these hydraulic lines right behind me, so that when we came into land, we had no brakes and no flaps. And that's pretty serious. All I can remember is that I hear this. It was instantaneous, brilliant light, a hell of a sound, and then the crash as it came down and hit me. And at that point, I just dropped right down. I was evidently knocked out. When I came to, and the bombardier's compartment, the bomb site was like, well, bomb site was like right here. And this part right here was where I crumpled down into. And I always wondered, how come I didn't hit one of those sharp corners? But I didn't, I just went right down. And as I immediately got right up, and that's when I felt for my ear and then my eye, and I knew I was not going to see it. Because when I was a kid and Dad would butcher things, I'd help him butcher. And he'd let me cut the gallbladder out of the liver. And he'd warn me, don't cut the gallbladder because that's terrible stuff. Oh, but I'd cut that worm liver. When I put my hand on my face, I thought, oh man, that feels like chopped liver. So I knew I was not going to see again. And little pieces of plexiglass had also just hit my face. But one of them hit my left eye, right smack dab in the middle. And it was in there scratching every time I blinked, but I could see through a red haze. So that's how I was able to see things. When I got up and felt my eye, then I thought, I need to tell my crew I'm still alive, because I dropped down right out of sight, right in front of the pilot and co-pilot. And they probably thought I was dead. I never got to talk to him afterwards, so I didn't know. But at any rate, I thought, hey, I've come. I tried to call him and I couldn't get him. And I thought my line, like this one, had come undone right down here at my waist. So I looked down, and as I did, there's this great gusher of blood coming out of my head. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't let that go on. I'll bleed to death. 5 miles up, 40 below zero. And the thing about it, the darn flak cut my, it just sheared my helmet and my earphone and my oxygen mask right off. So my oxygen mask was just flopping down here, so I wasn't getting any oxygen. But because I'd raised here at the foot of the Wind Rivers, I had high tolerance for oxygen. And so it didn't bother me that much. They even used me as a guinea pig in decompression chamber to show others what happens, you know, as you go up. At any rate, I got this deal out of the Red Cross thing, the little packet, and I found a square and I stuck it on my face and it just froze instantly. It's 40 below zero. So then I thought, oh boy, my bombs aren't gone, and so I've got to get it done. So I went back to the bomb site, but I couldn't get anything to happen. And then the bombardier had a deal up here with little lights on it that showed you if the bombs were all gone. And if they weren't, you had to get in the back and lever them out. But I looked up there and it was all lit up. And I thought, oh boy, good, the pilots dropped them. When I saw the bombs were all gone, why, that was a relief to me. So I thought, well, I'll just sit down. So I did, sat down on the canister. And as I was sitting there, kind of running through my mind what had happened, I thought, oh my gosh, that was divine intervention. Had to have been, because I was looking over here at that and I just felt this move my head like that. Almost like a hand had turned my head so that I was oriented this way. Otherwise, if I'd still been looking, I wouldn't be sitting here. That flak would have hit me about here and just sheared my head off. Because there's a big chunk of flak. You knew that if the enemy drew blood, you got a Purple Heart. I knew about that, but I didn't think anything about a medal. Nothing whatsoever. Because I didn't think there was anything that I had done that would bring recognition. But the higher-ups evidently thought, my golly, that took lots of guts, lots of courage. I was in the hospital. I was in the hospital at Barrie for about 6 weeks, and then they moved me to a hospital in Naples. And it wasn't until I was in the hospital at Naples and I'd gone out for a walk somewhere. I was up and around, walking around, you know. I'd been fitted with a kind of a plastic ball for my eye. But I didn't have glasses, but I had recovered enough from that plexiglass in this eye that I could see fine. So I was walking around, so I'd been out for a walk and I came back and there was this little package about like so laying on my pillow, and I thought, I wonder what this is. I opened it up and it was a silver star.
Wow.
Oh. Well, I think my first reaction was, what did I do to deserve this? I didn't do anything, I was just doing my job. So.
Tell me about your family.
My dad, he was born at Lafayette, Colorado. That's how come he was named Leif, or Lafayette. My granddad was working in the coal mines there, right around Longmont and Lafayette. And so when my dad got old enough, 14 years old, got out of the 8th grade, he just went down to coal mines. But he sure became a well self-educated man. My mother had gone through high school right here in Lander. She was born at Milford, 1901. My great-grandparents had come, as I mentioned there, in 1878, and my great-granddad died in he died just before my mother was born in 1901, and then my great-grandmother died in 1911. On my dad's side, my granddad, well, when they were still in Montana, right after World War I, something happened to my grandmother, and she must have suffered terrible depression because she committed suicide. Never got to meet her. She died just before I was born. And then my granddad died during the latter part of the Depression. He was staying with my aunt, my dad's sister. But Dad was 88 when he died, after all he'd gone through, and my mom lived to be 93 after all she'd gone through. My mother has a kind of an interesting story because she was the oldest child and the oldest daughter. And so my granddad was a team freighter. He hauled stuff in wagons with teams from the railroad here to Fort Washakie. He'd gotten the contract. And so when Mom was 12, I think it was, she started wrangling his horses for him, and when she was 14, she drove one of the wagons. He would outfit 2 wagons in the morning, and they would start from Milford, and she would go to the agency. The agency, you know, if you're familiar with the Fort Washakie area, agency was off up the road off the highway, and the fort, of course, was straight ahead. So there were 2 different places, and there was several miles between them. My granddad would load up a great big wagon and take 2 teams, and he would haul his wagon to the fort. And he would load hers to go to the agency. So when out by Ray Lake somewhere, they separated, and he went around the low side of the lake to the fort, and she went around the high side to the agency. And I don't know how they got back together again, if they even did afterward, but at any rate, she would tell about how she really liked going to the agency because there were lots of ladies there who would bake cookies just for her. After the war, I went back to the university, and my second year there, I noticed this little bouncy little gal around the campus, and I hadn't seen her before. And I said, "Who is that little gal?" And they said, "That's Tommy Wilcox." I said, "Well, I want to meet her." So I did. Yeah, she was sure a cute little gal, full of fun, and we got together and then split for about 6 months. Broke my heart. Evidently it kind of did hers too, but we got back together. 54 years.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
You know, when you get up into your 70s, you begin to think, well, one of these days probably you're going to die. Well, sure enough, we didn't know it. She had high blood pressure. So Dr. Phipps he had prescribed this medicine for high blood pressure. And every time we took her in there, her blood pressure was fine. But unbeknownst, she was having some silent strokes. Mini strokes, they're called. And after we found out about it, I thought, yeah, I can remember where they're acting rather strange. And I'd look at her and I'd say, "Are you all right, honey?" "Yes." but she wasn't. Those darn many strokes just destroyed her brain, and she died a terrible death. I just, hated it. Got married on October 15th, 47, and boy, it didn't take us long to start a family. 9 months and 3 days later, we had our first little baby boy. And then quickly following that, a second boy, and quickly following that, a third boy. And I said, boy, I'm going to stop this. So I had a vasectomy, and that stopped that. But later, Tommy said, well, before we'd even got married, we said, well, if we can't have kids, let's just adopt some. So we'd already talked about adopting. Well, when our youngest biological son was 16, Tommy really got itchy. And she'd been going to some of these meetings with gals, with younger women. And this one kept telling her about this baby they were adopting. Well, you know, about 2 weeks before the baby was to be born, this little gal came to the meeting. She said, you know what? We got to adopt our boy. And then but I guess Tommy had said she'd kind of like to have, you know, and so this gal asked Tommy, you want to adopt this boy? If this baby's a boy? And so Tommy said, well, I need to talk over with Tom. So she came home and we talked about it, and I said, well, sure. So I guess they had talked about it beforehand. This young couple wanted a baby boy. And she had asked Tommy, what if it's a girl? Would you like to adopt it? And so Tommy and I, you know, kind of talked a little bit about it, but he didn't think about it. So when the baby came, sure enough, it was a boy. So that was our first adoption. And then when the little boy was about 6, he kept saying, I want a brother. Because he saw these other kids with brothers. Yeah. So we said, well, all right, we'll look into it. Well, we came in to the Betty Kale now. He worked in down in the county office. Well, but the gal in the office, though, the main gal, when she found out I'd had a vasectomy, she said, nope, you can't adopt. I thought, well, what the heck's the difference? What's the deal? But at any rate, then, so Betty Kale was watching for us. She knew we'd like to really adopt one. And we said, yeah, we'd kind of like a little boy brother for our little boy. So when they called that morning, they had a little boy, little black boy at Gillette. And they said, would you be interested? And we said, well, sure. And but then Betty called right back and she said, you know, we just got a call from Rollins. There's 2 little girls that need a family in Rollins. We said, okay. Yeah. And the oldest of those little girls was half black. Okay. I don't know whether you know Rachel, my daughter.
Rachel. I love Rachel.
Yeah. Yeah, I love her just as much as if I'd fathered her. Yep. Yeah, they're all still alive. And my adopted son lives with me. He, kind of a strange story about him. When, I don't know how to explain it, we had just, well, go back to this young woman. When this young woman said, hey, we have our baby, you want to adopt this baby? Well, then we told her doctor that we would take the baby. So when he was born, the doctor's office was right up here, can't think of who's in there now. It's one of the very last office buildings up Main, on the right. Okay. I noticed it's empty now. Yeah. That was the doctor's, no. The doctor's office was in the house this side. Okay, I know which one you're talking. Yeah. That doctor, he's sure a nice guy. He committed suicide. But at any rate, he just called us up and he said, I have a baby here for you. Of course, we knew about when the little boy is to be born, so Tommy was all set up with diapers and everything. So we just drove up there, and he walked out into the backyard and handed us a little bundle.
Great.
But we noticed right away that he's rather dark complexioned. And his the thing that put on babies said Hernandez. So we thought maybe he was Mexican. It didn't make any difference, you know, but at any rate, he was this little dark-skinned guy. Well, as time went on and we adopted the 2 girls, we told all of them, you know, you're adopted. But it doesn't make any difference. But when you get old enough and you'd like to try to find your own real biological parents, we'll help you. So when the girls got to be about 16, 17, along in there, they said, yeah, we'd like to kind of like to know. And so we said, all right. And so we started looking, and they found, Rachel didn't. The people that had taken Rachel and Christine both in said, you don't want to find him. He's not that good. So it's really neat that Rachel is such a neat girl.
Yeah, she's one of a kind.
But after they had found their biological parents, then Vic said, well, yeah, I'd kind of like to know. So we put him on the right track, and he got to looking. By golly, his biological mother, as you might know, was an Indian gal.
Wow.
And she was living right in Riverton all the time.
That's crazy, isn't it? Wow.
But he has met her, and they are on wonderful terms. And
that's great.
She had other kids, so he has half brothers and sisters. So, yeah, everything turned out all right. And our big boys, of course, they're pretty well set in life. Alan, who's the oldest, retired as an Army major in intelligence, and he's retired and lives at Steilacoom, Washington, and he and his little wife have a daycare.
Oh, great.
Great big one, 25, 30 kids.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, I don't know how they do it.
Work, yeah.
Oh, man. And David married a Mormon gal here, and they had 7 kids, so I have 7 grandkids by them, and about 23 great-grandkids.
Wow,
Oh,
that's
gee.
great, so a lot of family.
Oh, yeah. And then Jim, I don't know if you ever knew the LaRoses here. He married Linda LaRose. Cute little gal, and they had 3 kids, but they don't have any grandkids.
So a couple of short questions. So, like, I'm a young mom, so we have 3 boys, a young family.
Good for you.
Yeah, do you have any advice about family, like any words of wisdom, just 1 or 2 sentences about family?
Love them, most of all, and I know you do. And you just try to do the best you can by them, you know? Boys we found out, are a little bit different than girls.
It's all I've got is boys.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. You scattered yours out a little bit.
Very blessed. Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. But, you know, you just encourage them, and I think that so many parents must not be teaching the ethical things, what's right and what's wrong. Gosh, we have deteriorated so much, but I think that's the main thing, of just teaching the kids right from wrong, and choosing their friends. Just watch carefully, you know, if their friends don't seem to be measuring up.
Yeah.
I'd sure try to steer them away from them.
So you're 87. I hope you live many, many more years. But you've really lived. Like, if you could just give us one piece of advice on, like, how to live our life, what would it be?
Gosh, I don't know quite how to answer that. I've lived a crazy life in a way. I sure admired my little wife putting up with me because I'd jump from one thing to another, you know. Not because I really wanted to, but because that's the way things turned out. But she stuck with me through thick and thin. And so, I don't know whether my life would be a very good one for people to follow.
Based on what you know now, and what you've lived through, what matters? What should matter?
Well, of course, again, I'll be different than a lot of people, because what mattered to me was this big, beautiful earth, and when I see things happening to it, it just disturbs me. Now, a lot of people, it just goes right past them. They think that's normal, that's the way it should be, and so on. But it's not, and we've come down to a place here in our history when I just can't see how we can continue on for very long. I'll be gone, but my kids and grandkids, oh boy. So I don't know, Shelli, just live it day by day. You just have to accept things as they come and just be grateful and thankful for your kids and your family, your husband, and your good health, and this beautiful world. And that's all we can do, is just live it day by day. Just have something to live for. In my case, I live for that big, beautiful world out there. In mothers' cases, I think much of it is living for their kids. And so, just be the good mother that you are and continue, and things will work out all right.